Let's get going. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you all here. So I'm just doing introductions today. I'm introducing Mark Cameron, who also happens to be my brother, for those who don't know. And today, Mark's going to be talking about AI and what the 5% who are succeeding are doing and what they're doing to get it right. This is an area that Alyve, and Mark in particular, there's been a lot of demand in the market for our view and how that's been working. And Mark has been leading the charge on that in his work with different organizations and boards and doing a lot of advisory work. And I think what he's presenting today is a synthesis of some of those insights. So hopefully you all find it valuable. The way this is going to go is I think the first 30 minutes or so, Mark will present. And after that, we'll take Q&A. But if you guys have any questions on the way through and you want to drop them into comments or anything of that type, please do so, and we'll capture those and we'll put them up at the end. All right. Thank you very much, and over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. And I'll just share my presentation now. Yeah, really appreciate everybody turning up today, and yeah, we're really looking forward to having this conversation. As Dan said, we're talking with organisations all across the country and around the world around how to respond to AI, I suppose. Obviously there's the technology aspect of it, but what we're seeing increasingly is how organizations and individuals need to start thinking about it and how to respond to it, more at a kind of a human level and a strategic level, to get to make the most of it and prepare their organization for the shift and transformation that AI inevitably brings. A little bit about me. Yeah, so I do a lot of work and advisory work, particularly focused on AI now. So I do a lot around enterprise and government. I teach digital transformation and AI transformation at Deakin and do a bunch of corporate education in that space. Britain was a digital strategy economist at BRW for a number of years, so I've been in that space of thinking about emerging technology and what it does for a very long time. And I also invest and sit on a range of boards, including YMCA in Victoria. And through that, I've become the special advisor on AI to YMCA globally. So I've got a broad sense of the conversations and the issues and the various worries that leaders are having around the world and lots of different organizations when it comes to AI and what it means for their business, what it means for their strategy, what it means for their people in particular. And then for those who don't know, this is Alyve. We do work with a whole range of different organizations. We're an advisory and consultancy in the technology space. Essentially, we help organizations adjust and make use of their technology investments. And the bit of the organization that I have tended to focus on repeatedly over the last, sort of 2 decades or so has been on the emerging technology side of it. And of course, AI is very much the emerging technology of the moment. So yeah, so it's the reason I've been leading the charge on that. So a little bit of context. So today, I will be probably talking for about sort of 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll leave it open for a bunch of questions at the end. But the starting context really is what's happening in the world, and Australia more broadly, when it comes to AI, and we'll start to dive into that in a little bit more detail. And we right at the very beginning, Dan said we talked about the 5%, and the stats are really starting to show that there is a really emerging gap between the organizations who are getting AI right for whatever reason it may be, versus the ones who are not. And while there's lots of different studies, it's these kinds of figures with a little bit of variation tend to be coming out almost all the time. So you're getting 5% at the top who are getting really, really, really significant return on investment. When I say that, it's really big numbers in terms of productivity, so 45, 50% productivity improvement. But more importantly, they're also getting revenue growth. And quite often, they are getting grow their actual the workforce is growing as well. So interestingly, there's a pattern emerging there where those organizations who are doing the best, they're not just saving money, their whole business is actually growing. Down the bottom, we get the ones who are lagging. So they get the organizations who are investing in AI, but it's really not delivering much in terms of return on investment. So it's sort of zero or a few percent. And then in the middle, we get the ones who are getting sort of modest return on investment. So the 10% kind of productivity improvement in pockets. It's not uniform across the organization. Um, and they're starting to see value, but they sort of haven't got the formula sort of quite right. So the question, as Daniel rightly said right at the beginning, and the question for today is really how do we as an organization, or what do we have to do to be able to set ourselves up to be in that 5% as opposed to being in that bottom sort of 60%. And the reason for this and the reason why it's really important is what we believe and what we are seeing and with the the research and analysis that we're doing across many markets and looking at the academic research is showing that the patterns that have merged with previous technology ways that impacted certain sectors. So things like online retail, for example, and media and so on, where it started to you started to get a real split in those markets where we started to see, a small number that sit at the top that essentially command the way that market works and are able to sort of set the pricing and to sort of really start to change the way those things work. And then kind of everybody else at the bottom kind of fighting around and competing over price. That pattern that has happened before, we're now starting to see that happen across all sectors at once, essentially. So that idea that AI is essentially starting to erode the middle is starting to play out. So our belief there is essentially, in many, many markets, what we're going to see is, sort of two populations that the ones that will really work out how to make AI work for their organization and turn and get the compounding benefits from that, and the ones that don't. And we kind of think that there won't be much in terms of a middle ground. So what's happening in Australia in particular, and how do we think about Australia's perspective on this? In in Australia, we have so AI adoption. It's happening, reasonably broadly. So we've got some numbers here, sort of reasonably high kind of individual adoption. But when it actually comes to the ROI and it comes to the business impact, um, and critically the sentiment around AI, so people's belief in it, Australia is very, very, very low. We have other organizations. So this study that was a recent study by EY, there's quite a lot of other studies that support this, where we're seeing that while Australia might be from a enterprise perspective, might be around the 50 to 60% of sort of rolling out across the organization. In terms of an impact, in terms of ROI, it's very, very, very low numbers. And then across the society as a whole, in terms of the sentiment, the belief about how much impact AI is going to have on the market is very low. And this is compared to the rest of the world. So why might that be? So one of the things I think we need to think about is the fact that when it comes to economic complexity, and economic complexity is a measurement of how well a nation's economy is capturing value through all the different stages. And there's 133 countries in that economic complexity index that comes out of Harvard Business School. Australia is very low. We're 105 in the world. We're one of the lowest Western countries in the world when it comes to economic complexity. And we've fallen, 42 places in the last 30 years. And if we think about what's happened in those last 30 years, we've had the dot-com boom and bust. We've had the global financial crisis. We've had COVID. And so there's been all these sort of economic shocks that have driven behaviors around the world. Australia has managed to weather those storms incredibly, incredibly well. So we're a very, very lucky nation. We're very, very wealthy. One of the highest in terms of GDP per capita. One of the highest in terms of total exports. But we are very low when it comes to capturing value, and that's because obviously we've had an economy that has been very reliant on essentially digging stuff out of the ground and shipping it overseas and buying it back when other nations and other organizations have added value to it, and to a lesser extent a property. So what I'm saying there, and don't take this as a criticism because this is no criticism of Australia, but what it is a systematic issue. We've got a country that is wealthy, that has been able to weather really significant shocks and changes because of that sort of innate wealth within inside the country, and therefore the incentive to take risks has been very, very low. And so that's essentially where we are right now as a nation. If we think about that, we've got this, as I said, this economic complexity gap, um, where we're very strong in resources, and certain services, but very thin on things like advanced manufacturing and deep tech. Um, and we have a leadership environment, both at a political and to a lesser extent, called a corporate level, that um, is very, very, very risk adverse. Essentially, as I said, many leaders, their entire careers have been focused on essentially maintaining the status quo. But if your working hypothesis is that the world is going to be increasingly dynamic from a macroeconomic, geopolitical, and technological standpoint, and given what's going on right now, it's a pretty safe bet, I'd say. I thinking about the world, and thinking about how to maintain what we've always done, and keep things moving in exactly the same way. So essentially maintaining status quo. I think the truth is it's actually heading backwards. There's no choice about it. And that number, as I said, that hypothesis is actually showing up in the numbers when it comes to economic complexity. The thing about that economic complexity index is it's not just a number. It's not just a thing that's sort of academic. What that correlates to is how well a nation, or how well a country is able to respond to economic shocks. Because the more complex an economy is, the more efficient, and the more effective it's able to capture value, and therefore be able to move and realign when there's things that happen that may impact the way that its economy works. So, of course, we're talking about macroeconomics here. There's not much that we can all do at an individual level to think about that. But the reason I talk about that is to just frame up the context. This is the environment we're in, where we're in a conservative environment that is not used to taking risks when it comes to technology, and from that perspective, the things you read in the paper. So what you see in the media, what your people may be, the discussions you may be having in working groups, or what your people may discuss together, it'll be come through that lens of let's wait and see, let's see how this plays out, let's think about this in a slightly different way, and not this sort of much bolder, let's adopt this technology and make the most of it as quickly as possible, which emerging technologies, sort of emerging countries around the world are very much doing. The good news is, though, that the fact that you're even here, the fact that we're even sort of having this conversation, talking about it, means that you're sort of like on that, sort of starting to explore what this means. There's a lot of people not even really entering the conversation. So that the fact that you're having this conversation right now, and are curious about how to think about AI and what that means, is a very important step, and it means that you're setting yourselves up to think about AI adoption and scaling it and getting the value from it in the right way. Of course, there are problems out in the market when it comes to AI, and it's unlike many technologies. One of the problems, and in fact, it's not actually a real problem, but one of the problems is we get kind of reports like this that came out from MIT last year that sort of talked about 95% of generative AI pilots in companies are failing. And what you'll notice there is that 95%, what it's actually saying is 5% is working. And as we said right from the outset, there's only 5% of organizations that are actually getting incredible value from AI as well. And what I would be saying about that is that 95% that aren't working. Well, first of all, there's some definite bias in that data, and those headlines um, they like to get picked up by the media and pushed around and sort of amplified very quickly. But the other aspect of it is the it, the pattern of organizations that are starting AI pilots that don't work is it's the AI, it's the organizations that are doing it from a top-down perspective. It's the organizations that are trying to identify a use case as quickly as possible. The leadership team are trying to identify a use case as quickly as possible, get something built, and then push it down through the organization and force people to adopt it. Those use cases, those pilots, are failing almost every single time. It's the organizations that are actually allowing their people and setting their organization up in a way that allows their people to identify the use cases and identify the ways of building up pilot, proof of concepts and pilots. They're the ones that are actually succeeding. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the other point around that is that the mindset for a lot of organizations, if you think about that, is what they're doing is they're going, well, what are the process? What are the things that we do? And then where is a part of that process that we can essentially automate with AI? That's the kind of mindset that they have. The thing about that though is that first of all, there's no process that's really been designed for AI. But the other aspect of it is that that mindset is very much an automation mindset. So it's like if we think about all the software that we've ever used previously has been deterministic. If we think about most software before AI was really, it's kind of like a data sausage factory. You put some information in, it gets processed, you get something really predictable coming out the other end. And you do the same thing, get exactly the same answer out every single time. Um, AI is not like that at all. AI is probabilistic. So you put a query in, you get an answer out. You put that same query in, you get a different answer out. Different person puts that same query in, they get a very different answer out. The mere fact that you're actually asking the same question twice will change the probabilities that around how it's actually thinking about processing it, and it will give you a different answer because it's essentially saying, well, why is the user asking this exact same thing twice? They probably wanted an alternate response. So part of that problem, part of that 95%, part of that issue around organizations that are doing this in that bottom 60% of performance, what's actually happening there is that they're bringing this old school mentality to a new technology. Essentially, as I said, it's bringing a deterministic mindset to a probabilistic issue. They're thinking about current processes, and how do we make those current processes go faster and cheaper, as opposed to saying, how do we make the most of this technology to reinvent the way that process works so that we can essentially, change the way our business operates. So at a leadership level, what I'd say is, that mindset, that understanding that you can frame this in a different way, that you need to think about this very much as a strategic standpoint through a strategic lens. And if you bring an automation mindset to AI, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's things that can be automated without a doubt. But just saying, here's a process and we want this part of the process to go faster and cheaper, and you're just viewing this through the lens of how do we do what we've always done but faster and cheaper? It's massively underutilizing the power that this technology has, and you're really, really constraining your whole organization from actually achieving new value. And so what I'd say is from a leadership standpoint, there are a number of traps to be aware of, and these are thinking traps that can sort of head you off in the wrong direction. So one of them is and just as I said, it's this efficiency trap. So thinking about it through the lens of efficiency. Now I know AI has been talked about efficiency, productivity all the time, and there are absolutely there are metrics showing that organizations that adopt AI well get efficiencies. The thing about it is it's the organizations that try and target the efficiencies are the ones that are actually struggling to get them. The organizations that actually say, well, what we need to do is change the way that our people work, and they're asking more fundamental questions. So a good example is, rather than going, how do we line up a bunch of use cases that help us do things slightly faster, they actually say, how do we bring this technology in and do all the things that we want to do to deliver on our organizational strategy and mission that we haven't been able to do before because we keep running into resource or budget constraints of some description. And that's that. It's just those organizations that are actually aiming for adding capacity to the organization and being able to be able to do more of what their business is put on the earth to do, essentially, they're the ones that actually end up with the greatest efficiency and productivity gains. And it's almost like a fantastic byproduct of aiming for a bigger strategic objective. So that efficiency focus is just how do we do what we've always done, but faster. And what I say there is, so the KPI piece there is really important, because if you're using this technology, which sometimes it is, automations and things that work independently, but a lot of the time it's essentially augmentation. It's people and AI working together. The problem is if you just put KPIs on that and everybody's incentivized to do everything as fast as possible, you get this real risk that if you think about, like a process inside of an organization of do some research, do some analysis, write a report, then, turn that into some kind of slick looking document and then deliver it for a decision. Um, that process, and every single step of that process, what will end up happening is you get people going, well, I can get AI to do all the research for me, and then get AI to do all the writing for me, and I can get AI to do this, and so my bit of that task is done as quickly as possible, and then I hand off to the next person. Of course, that might sound all right initially, but what that means is over time, and I guarantee we're going to see the outcome, the sort of the impact of this very soon with some organizations. But over time, what ends up happening is you get whole workforces that are spitting out lots and lots of pretty documents that nobody understands, essentially, and essentially becoming efficiently irrelevant. That's how we term it, where you're creating lots and lots and lots of documents, but essentially heading to where the market is not heading, where your customers don't care. Whereas if you're actually thinking about this technology through a learning lens, so what could we be doing differently? How do we focus on KPIs that allows us to learn and compound? And we're starting to measure the new value that's being created. And we're thinking about processes and ways of working that intentionally develop critical thought rather than erode it. Then you get an organization that starts to head on this compounding learning journey, which that becomes increasingly effective. Um, you know, Simple question is, do you want people to spit out more documents, or do you want people to work on the document that has the greatest impact? And I think that's, like you'd rather have one document that has a huge impact than hundreds and hundreds of documents that have none. And the other one is the control trap. And this is sort of a fear response one, for leaders, where we get leaders to feel pressure to adopt AI really quickly, but because they haven't sort of worked out exactly what that means and how to make it work, and they're viewing it as a technology problem, not as a human problem, then everything gets centralized to try and manage risk. Of course, what that means is that the people then start going, well, I don't feel comfortable going on a journey of learning and experimenting and trying to understand how to use the technology. So that experimentation actually starts to slow down. As a result, teams stop trying, and then that gap starts to widen. And so what you see with organizations, so that's a lot of those organizations in that middle group that I was talking about before, they sit in that kind of space here where you get people rolling out AI in some shape or form. Um, you get this little bump in productivity because people use it to write emails and look at how do I review a PDF and all those kinds of things, and then it plateaus out really, really quickly, because people haven't continued to learn how to use the technology, and as a result, that gap starts to widen, and then there's more pressure. So there's that cycle of not really sort of breaking out of this kind of cycle, and then this wait and see trap, where we're sort of going, well, AI is risky. We're not quite sure what it's going to do. We're going to wait to see how other people have done it, and then we're going to copy it. Problem is, of course, is that you've got this technology is moving at a pace that we've never seen before, and and we're now kind of almost at the stage where everything is becoming kind of like a self-improvement loop, where the AIs are essentially the AI. But you think about the frontier AI labs, so the open AIs and the Anthropics of the world. The reason why their tools are very good at research and coding is because those are the two skills that our frontier labs need to be able to build the next version of the AI itself. So there's all this sort of self-improvement loop starting to happen there. And so that the waiting and seeing is it's just going to get increasingly difficult. The great news is though is that it doesn't have to be really difficult to be able to get things moving. And particularly if you focus on what is the culture that we need to be able to develop sort of learning and sharing information and and thinking about how we actually lead through this model, this shift, rather than getting caught up in the technology issues themselves. The technology is going to keep evolving, and trying to keep up with the technology is almost impossible. Um, but getting a plan for actually starting to work out how to manage it is a little bit more straightforward. So, from my perspective, and one of the things we say is the greatest risk really isn't moving fast or even too slow in some cases. It's really becoming efficiently irrelevant. And you know, I think you don't. When I say too slow, you have to do something. You have to start thinking about how your organization is going to respond. But you don't have to spend huge on technology. You don't have to spend huge amounts on developing individual use cases. And you will do at some point, but you don't have to do it right away. You don't need to feel like you need to do that right away. And moving fast, well, there's no way of moving at the same pace that the actual technology is moving. So the biggest risk is actually only focusing on AI through the lens of efficiency, and really starting to do it in a way that is going to send you on a path that's going to be very, very difficult to undo. So what do we have to do to become one of the 5%? I think what we have to do is really think about, doing the right things in the right way. Um, the it really has to start with people, and what we talk about is sort of the three things that you need to get sorted out in line, which is mindset, skill set, tool set. So what is the mindset we need to develop both as leaders and across the organization? What are the skills we need to create and own to be able to develop to be able to be really good at using this technology? And then finally, how do we apply that at scale with our tool set of choice? Mayo Clinic is one of the examples I like to talk about a lot, which is they do that incredibly well, where the leadership of the organization, they're in an environment which is highly regulated. They've got lots of very sensitive data. They've got, so both from an IP perspective and and sort of a patient perspective, they've got, a reasonably challenging workforce because every single person essentially is a PhD researcher, and they're incredibly smart but don't always like to be told what to do. And so you'd think that what they would do is see risk everywhere and put lots of controls in place. But what they did instead is said, well, actually, we've got all the governance that we need. We've got ethics, we've got risk management, we've got cost controls. We can just have AI as a subset of that. And then they said to their people, look, we don't know. We don't know what this technology is going to do. We don't know what the use cases are. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't really know how you're going to use it. But what we do know is that if we support you to get really good at using this technology, and by support, it means that we've got technology available, we've got capability available for people to be able to support you, and we've got a way of recognizing you as you start to have a greater impact, then we know that you will be able to do more of what you're here to do, which is essentially do great research, discover new science, and save lives. And they just connected it very, very, very succinctly to their mission. And as a result, after a year or so of after their first year, they were talking 45% productivity improvement, roughly 12% staff growth, no shrinkage, and almost $500 million of new revenue directly attributed to that initiative. And Now, further down the track, I don't know what the actual numbers are because they haven't been published, but they're coming out with a new product that is AI centered almost every month at the moment. So I'd imagine it'd be, billions of dollars. So what's the mindset piece that I talked about? I think the thing to think here is that this is not about automation. It's really about augmentation. Yeah, the elements that can be automated, sure, um, and that's fine. But in order for your organization to be able to pick this up and to be to work out how to build it into what you do as a business and turn it into a competitive advantage, you really need to start to develop that mindset. And as I said, as you can see here, this is this old mental model really is, which is, AI is going to do everything to AI is here to support you. It's going to be a thinking partner. It can challenge you. It can help you think about data and information in a new way. Everybody's responsible for lifting the fluency across the organization. And we're starting to talk about this kind of continuous learning loop of sensing, reasoning, acting, and learning. It's well, how does compounding learning actually work within a system that has both artificial intelligence and human intelligence collaborating at the core. And remember that, every process you have was designed before AI existed. In fact, it probably wasn't designed, let's be honest. Most processes and organizations just evolve over time. It's something that needs to get done. And then a bit of compliance and a bit of extra thing happened, and it just sort of starts to evolve over time. Um, but this is a fantastic catalyst to actually rethink that. This is a fantastic time to, rather than go, how do we make that process go faster? It's actually, should this process even exist in this world that we're heading into? How can we rethink this process with artificial intelligence bedded into it? And what's the skill set? So there are different skills for being able to do it, and there's lots of technical things that we can talk about and so on. But really, I just think there's one skill that I think is the most important one, particularly from a leadership to talk about, which is really just using it to think differently and more deeply. Um, and this is the pattern that's showing that the highest performers inside organizations that are using AI, that sort of it's usually about sort of 10% in organizations when you look at it that are using AI to have incredible impact. This is the skill that they're developing. It's not just the technical piece of how to use it, but it's actually getting the AI to challenge them, getting it to think more deeply. They're iterating, they're going deeper, they're looking at scenarios and planning, and they're thinking about all whole different ways of approaching the problem. Fundamentally going, how do I make sure that I'm asking exactly the right question to produce the highest quality outcome? Not just how do I produce an output as fast as possible, it's outcome focused. And that's the real difference. The more that you get used to thinking about how do I create the highest impact outcome, then the way that you work with these tools starts to change very quickly. And so, what I say about that is that this isn't really about a job. It's really about your mind. And we do have choice. We can use this technology just in a way to do things faster and faster and faster. As I said, the problem is it's going to erode our ability to think critically and deeply. Or we can use it in a way that allows us to explore information in new ways, and understand ourselves with it, understand ourselves and the context of how we're thinking about that information, think about how we can invite different viewpoints and be able to really start to explore problems in a deeper way, and then use that to really start to have the highest possible impact in whatever job it may be or whatever task we may be thinking about. And that's essentially adding capacity individually and at an organizational level. We're adding capacity, not just doing things faster. One thing I'll just explain, or just talk about really quickly that sort of illustrates this is just a little story I like to tell about my own kids. Um, Now I've got two boys, they're 12 and 9, and they play like a lot of kids their age, they play a lot of Minecraft, which can sometimes frustrate me. And one day when I was getting particularly bored at looking at the back of their iPads, I said, "Hey kids, put your iPads down. We're going to do something together." And of course I got the moaning and the whining that you'd expect from two young kids. And I said, no, don't worry. What we're going to do is we're actually going to create a game together. And so what I asked them is, tell me about a game that you'd like to have that you don't currently have. And they got super creative and they started talking about this game that was going to be set inside a ball pit and there's lots of spooky things going on. And after this big brain dump of them getting sort of really, really creative, I'd recorded that whole conversation and I turned that to a transcript. I dropped that into at that point ChatGPT, and then we started working with various AI tools. And after a very, very short period of time, we kind of had a functional prototype of that game. And then I asked the kids to start drawing little characters. And then we used other AI tools to then start to turn those into like 3D models that we could start dropping into the game. My youngest son got really excited and wanted to create a whole level when he started to draw this thing out, and then we were able to turn that into kind of like a framing. And by the end of that afternoon, we had kind of this thing. We could put music in it and sounds and all these different things. And it was never going to be a game that you'd be able to publish or make money from. But the thing that I wanted to happen and I hoped would happen happened. When my eldest son said to me, "Hey, Dad, does that mean anything I can imagine I can create?" And that is the mindset shift. That shift of actually going, "Hang on, I'm here. I'm worried about AI, and I'm thinking about what it can do, and I'm thinking about how to use it, and blah blah." To all of a sudden, oh my God, I can use this to do anything. And that became a massive, massive, massive shift in the way that, and I think if we can unlock that in our people, that is a huge value unlock. So I think, um, I think teaching kids about AI, and about how to think about AI and use it in a really safe way isn't about telling them how to get an output. It's about how to get them to ask better questions. And that same thing applies with our staff and our people. This is not about delegating your thinking out. It's about partnering with the AI tool to be able to think more deeply. And so, what do we do from a leadership standpoint? Well, the first thing we need to do is just understand that it's the value actually comes not from AI itself or the technology itself. Look, technology in and of itself is never that interesting. Let's be honest. Technology only becomes interesting when it enables people to solve new problems and create new value. That's where technology becomes interesting. And so, as leaders, we need to make sure that we've got alignment around what that means as an organization. We see this cohesion problem happen quite often where we get, everybody and all the leaders inside the organization are bought into AI, but all for different reasons. Some people want the cost out, some people want new values, some people want, people being trained, some people want lots of content being created, all these different things, and they're all pointing in different directions. So having a very cohesive direction about what that means, which is connected to mission, is really, really important. And then start thinking about what does it mean for the way we organize ourselves and making sure that it's a human-centered approach. Those things are very, very important. And understand for people to learn this technology and then get the real big impact, you may actually have a bit of a dip in productivity. The organizations that, as I said, that get that quick bump up, then it plateaus. The organizations that sometimes it's flat or sometimes they get a little dip in productivity and then they get this massive growth, they're the ones that are essentially investing in their people to learn and develop new skills that are going to be impactful for the organization. So from that point, the thing that we talk about and the one metric that is incredibly important from an AI perspective is, and the thing that the 5% are doing better than that bottom bit is really focusing on learning velocity. How fast are we learning as an organization, and how do we capturing that learning into the systems that our AI tools can access? And that's the thing. The organizations that are able to learn the fastest in a highly dynamic environment and be able to respond to shifts and changes in the landscape, they're the ones that end up winning. So that's really sort of the end of this talk. And I'm not sure if there's been any questions, but yeah, I hope that was valuable. I think the thing that, yeah, again, the key message that we're trying to get across here is that is understand that if it, and when you think about AI, it's not the technology itself, it's actually the technology and the people coming together that actually generates value.
Thank you, Mark. So we're at time now, so we're going to have to wrap up. I apologize we haven't got through all the questions. There's some really good ones that we've just run out of time to answer, unfortunately. So thank you for asking them all. Thank you for engaging. And there's been a question around the recording link. I'm sure we can share that with you all. So we'll work that out and send that out. And if any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. But thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.